Hello, everybody. Welcome to New Earth Teachings Live. I am your host, Brad Johnson. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with me this evening. So we're going to have some really exciting conversations tonight, as the topic of our discussion this evening is library worlds and Earth's wealth. So I'm going to be having a perspective both through myself and through Adronis, as he's going to be sharing some insight as it relates to the ancient worlds and even the purpose of a lot of these library worlds that are quite rare within our galaxy. But Earth would represent one of these particular library worlds. So we're going to be talking about that tonight. Firstly, before we get into the main topic tonight, it's been pretty interesting because the past few nights I've had two dreams. I think the first dream was about 3 nights ago, I believe, and it was a direct contact from the blue avians. And so the first dream I had actually involved one of my good friends, Rob Gauthier. He was actually in the dream, and he was on stage. There was like an audience of people. I was in the crowd as well too, and he basically introduced these two blue avian beings. One appeared male, one appeared female, and I wasn't thinking too much. I was, oh, this is probably just part of the dream, interacting with some type of parallel reality. Hey, that's cool, no problem, right? So I didn't think of it too much. Then, of course, last night I had another dream, and this was a single blue avian that came in, and he started having this kind of energetic discourse with me, just talking about the human design, talking about how their DNA is encoded with certain humans upon the planet. Not all of them, but certain ones. And that the ones that basically have this particular type of DNA coding within themselves are the ones that are basically able to connect with the blue avians. So they have a very unique genetic trait with them. Again, I'm not a major geneticist or a major scientist, so I couldn't really break it down in regards to the type of DNA. Or some people say, "Oh, Brad, what about the Rh negative? Is that it?" I don't know. I couldn't tell you in that way. But I never really thought too highly of the blue avians. I was never really big on wanting to contact them, and that I said, if they want to talk to me, that's cool. But I was never really big in saying, oh, Corey Good talks about the blue avians a lot, and oh, I just can't wait to contact them myself. I was never like that. I was actually in times somewhat discerning with their energy, and I wasn't too sure about them in that way. But basically, when I had this dream last night, one of them came through. It was very, very loving, very pleasant, very wonderful, being just filled with love and filled with just wanting to share this information. And so basically, I was kind of being taken on this dream tour about them, and that they have been a part of this earth for many millions of years. And they are basically a future version of us, an evolutionary descendant. And that basically they have mixed their own genetics with avian DNA as well too, and they exist in another particular plane. I'm not too sure if Corey has talked about that in that particular way, but basically the being that came to me last night was talking to me about how their role with humanity is, their interaction with all of us is, and basically again these certain forms of gene keys that are contained within specific humans that will have access to the blue avian collective consciousness. And so they do represent that of the 6th density. So they're on the 6th density plateau, just as Adronis is. And again, I had a really great conversation with Sun Au Ra. That's basically what he refers to himself as. So the spelling of that name is Sunaurah. So there's a lot of connections to the idea of the sun god, to the aspect of Christed consciousness, to the aspect of the raw energy. So, and there's also the counterpart that he has as well too, known as Ra, right? So C again represents that of chi, energy, in that sense, life force. Again, a lot of great symbolisms to their names. So it's kind of like how Nefertitis came in and basically used that name, right? Nefer representing that of pleasant, good, majestic energy, and then of course Titus representing that of an honorary title. And so it feels like Sun Ra and Ra are basically doing the same thing here. So they looked a little bit different, very, very minutely. When I connected with the blue avians, they basically had black eyes. So basically black eyes like you would see on a sparrow, or seeing on a crow, or seeing like on a robin, just a little bird-like black eyes. And that's what I saw with Sun R Ra. And I know with Corey, when he talks to Ra to your ear, it's kind of more human-like in that way with the eyes. But basically when I tapped into the blue avians, they basically just had the pure black eyes. But basically their body, their frame was almost identical to how Ra to your ear looks in that way from Corey Good's contact. So that's basically all I communicated with them about. I talked to them briefly today and just asked about their names. Is there something I can call them? And it did not come to me right away. The blue avians really guard their energy. They're very, very they're very picky about who contacts them. There is basically a very strong level of humility that a contact needs to have to connect with the blue avians. This is why some people are not able to channel them so well. Basically, they kind of go through a screening process, and it's all about a level of humility. And if you don't have this particular level of humility, it's not that they're going to leave your space. It's more so in the idea, it's kind of like looking at a gauge, or looking at like an information bar here. And once that bar hits a certain amount of humility, then they're happy to communicate with you. So again, I never had the anticipation of connecting with the blue avians. I had no real interest in communicating with them. But now that they've communicated with me, then I'm happy to bring them in. So next week, that will be the topic of next week's webcast, will be empathic interfacing with the blue avians. So we're going to be talking to them next week. I just want to become a little bit more familiar with their energy. I want to kind of get to know them a little bit more before I bring them in for a public forum. But it does feel like this is the time where the blue avians are now coming through and they're communicating with certain people on the planet. Again, those that have their gene keys connected to them. I'm one of those people. Corey's one of those people. There may be a few other people, again, who have connections with the blue avians. But there's a gene key that's involved with that. That's all the information I really have about that from what I'm attempting to recall from my dream state last night. But he was showing me, again, this like their own genetic patterns and seeing how it's being placed together within certain people. And some of these people, again, can come from various ethnicities. The one I saw in the dream was, Caucasian man, kind of long, dark hair in that way. And it was kind of like just showing like this fusion between their genetics and the genetics of the human being that I saw, and connecting to the gene key that I apparently have to connect with them. But again, there just needs to be a humility factor as it relates to the blue avians themselves. So we'll see how that goes with next week, connecting with the blue avians. So again, they don't really channel per se. People that claim that they can channel them, that's fine. But really, the people who were able to channel one of those beings was Carla Rueckert in the Law of One, as it is theorized that Ra would represent one of the blue avians from the Law of One, and that she was able to channel him, but able to go into a very deep trance-like state. And I had the honor of interviewing Carla Rueckert back in 2011 on my self-empowerment radio program, and I got to talk to her, and she was telling me a background about her connections with Ra and connecting with the Law of One. And again, talking with Carla, it was always great because she just told me one thing that has stuck with me to this day. She basically said, well, Brad, it's very easy to channel, but to channel well is hard, right? And that's always been my drive about being able to channel well. Carla Rueckert has primarily been one of my favorite channels of all time because there is no other particular material like the Law of One. That's my personal favorite. So I really was honored to be able to communicate with her back in 2011, having that conversation. So again, the blue avians primarily going through empathic interfacing in this way, or intuitive interfacing in this way. So I'm looking forward to bringing them in next week. Okay, guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started with tonight's topic of discussion, library worlds and Earth's wealth, and then we're going to move into Q&A once we get that finished. So again, if you guys do have any questions after the presentation is done tonight, then you can go ahead and just leave your questions here in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer some questions that come my way. So I'm just going to take a moment now. What I'm going to do right now is I just want to take a moment. We're just going to take a moment just to go into a moment of silent teaching. and then we're going to move into the topic of discussion. And looking into the library worlds. Looking into the library worlds is something that has been a gem of this galaxy. That these library worlds were once very fruitful within the beginning times of the galaxy, to where planets were being created, planets were manifesting, and each of them held a particular gem, a shard of the galaxy's oversoul. And through times of great conflict, great calamity, these planets were placed strategically within certain areas of the galaxy. If we are to look into our own star system, we are able to see that Earth is indeed one of these library worlds. The other library worlds would consist that of Venus, would consist that of Mars, and did consist that of the planet that is no longer with us, known as Meldek. And Meldek could have been referred to as the epicenter to these library worlds, for it held the relics of much of the galactic creators, the galactic architects, the game masters, and that if we're able to look into Venus, look into Mars, that if we go into the planet itself, looking upon the surface, is that those ancient pyramids, those ancient temples, those ancient ruins, the ancient sphinxes that are there are basically doorways that are linking us more so to their own internal Argatha. So into the inner Mars, into the inner Venus, into the inner Earth. Those are where the true galactic library relics exist. There are also moons around Jupiter, moons around Saturn, of course the moon of Mars, Phobos, that also contains certain contingencies of these relics. Now, what are these relics? Well, these relics could basically be seen as keys, as puzzle pieces that are actually meant to come together and give the orientation about how humanity began, its origins, and the great blueprint that has been on this world of Earth that we'll be talking about this evening, relating to Earth's wealth. Humanity has really been a biological treasure. There has been millions and millions of years of collaboration, of genetic sequencing, of genetic alterations, of beings being able to come together and match their own DNA components together. Some of these beings really do not even like each other, but they have all held these particular gene keys, and that these gene keys represent this communion between other races that would therefore engineer the human race. And again, this began on Meldek, but of course the experiment was a little bit more different at that time. For again, much in regards to the life that existed upon Meldek consisted that of giants, of the Nephilim, of the Anunnaki that we would refer to as well. And again, beings from 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, even 50 feet tall. Of course, all types of life, basically in macro size, looking again perhaps 3 to 5, maybe even 10 times the size on Meldek as it would be compared to Earth, compared to Mars, compared to Venus. So basically, Mars, Earth, Venus, even the moon known as Ceres, were all once part of the satellite orbits of Meldek. And that these ancient living libraries were all part of, you could say, purified aspects of life. This is why Earth has been referred to as a God world, not just because of the humans that exist here, but because much of the other biology that was very much created due to the specifications that the Earth herself wanted upon her surface. So the Earth really represents this precious gem. A lot is still not known as it relates to her beginnings, to her inceptions. She was created as any other planet was, but there was a very deep spiritual connection in regards to her creation. And her creation was to bring the intention of having a multitude of multicultural life forms existing upon her planet, upon her body. And that a lot of different forms of continents that once existed, from the continent of Mu, from the continent of Atlantis. There may have also been some other smaller islands or smaller landforms as well too, land masses that existed at that time that again are now at the bottom of the ocean, with the exception of Atlantis, representing that of Antarctica. So primarily, the Earth had a very strict contingency plan about the type of life forms that would exist upon her surface. And she basically, you could say, has been a living Tower of Babel, meaning that she has wanted to bring about unification to many different life forms that have been seeded throughout all different forms of planets existing within our galaxy. And so basically she wanted to be this central hub. So a living library world is one that contains a vast multiculturalism, not just a certain theme in that way that may relate to just some scattered life forms, maybe very few in number, perhaps only certain levels of sentience that would exist upon the planet, even in regards to environmental conditions, for there can be planets that are just almost like garden worlds, but they have no form of variety. Some of them cannot exist as deserts, or some of them may not exist as swamps, or whatever it may be. But Earth, again, has a very diverse multiculturalism as it relates to its own planetary sphere. And so, all of these beings that have all synchronistically come together, karmically in number, have again brought forward some really incredible life forms on this planet that could really fill a multitude of planets just through their own variety alone. Now, basically, what is known about Earth is that it is under insectoid jurisdiction, is that the Earth and Venus, Mars, etc., many of the inner planets have been once populated by many different insectoid beings. And of course, reptilians came in a little bit later. But this is pretty much all insectoid jurisdiction. We could basically refer to ourselves as being adopted by the insectoid races. Not because, in that sense, so much out of the kindness of their own heart, but because there is an equivalent exchange here. And saying, oh, okay, well, you want to create this really ambitious project of having a human race comprised of 22 different genetic species. Well, that's quite interesting. I think we'll get in on that, right? It was more so in the idea of striking a bargain in that sense, as much of the insectoid races aren't always known for their emotional nature in that way, but more so as it relates to being more so mellow and, again, very technological. So basically, a lot of the the insectoids would exist within the Oort cloud, and even within the Oort cloud, there can be several different planets that may be Earth-like, that are, again, may not even be detected, or are detected but are, again, kept under wraps. And many of these are kind of like, it's like the ring of the insectoid observation between the planets that exist here and, of course, our connection to Earth. But again, humanity has been the prize jewel as it relates to Earth herself, simply because we are such a diverse cultural, I would say contrast cultural life form. Our nature is that we are always so good at taking everything to the extremes. We're all about bringing about the wealth of perspective in the deepest ways possible, right? If we're going to create something, we're going to take it to the deepest level of extreme until it's almost ready to blow us up, right? Until it's almost ready to create some type of disaster. And so this is what humanity has been so marveled at as it relates to their abilities in being able to invent things. And again, this is why They are the living librarians of this living library world. It's because we are able to surf contrast like no other race that exists. We are the most emotional race, simply because we can be sad one moment, we can be happy the next. We can be miserable one moment, we can be joyful the next. We can just go through these surfings of contrast so easily. And again, so many other races cannot even believe that we can do this. It is not common in the galaxy, in the universe whatsoever, for one particular race to just one moment be sad and the next minute just be bouncing happy, right? That's almost considered impossible to many of the races out there. And again, that's getting us an impression about the type of beings that we're going to be coming in contact with. The closest beings that would have that type of reference, not quite to like how we would, but somewhat to that reference, would be much of the reptilian races. So the reptilian races would be kind of like second on the list as it relates to certain levels of emotions in that way. So again, simply because they've worked with all different types of genetic extractions and sub-race creation and genetic manipulation, etc. They are quite emotional themselves. So basically you could say that the Earth Terran, the Earth human race, would be at the first on the list. The second could be something like, say, the Draco in that way. So they too have, again, a great familiarity with emotions, but they still can't bounce back and forth like the way that we can. No race can do that other than ourselves. So this is, again, why we're kind of the top of the ladder as it relates to emotion, as it relates to the uniqueness of the human race, simply because we're a universal model of incarnation. And so there can be any particular soul that comes into this galaxy, can just come into Earth and incarnate, again, should they meet the vibrational prerequisites as we're moving more into fourth density. So they can come in and they can incarnate on this planet, and they may have been mantis, they may have been insectoid, they may have been reptilian, they may have been mammaloid, they may have been aquatics, they may have been feline, they may have been canine. You know, they could be any of these particular types of races that exist throughout the galaxy. Plasmic beings, beings in angelic realms, higher consciousness that can just come here and bring their life essence to this world, enter the queue, create a soul contract, pop into a body, and now start living. And a lot of planets don't do this. A lot of planets are much more quote-unquote nitpicky as it relates to the type of beings that come upon their planet. So Earth, again, is this unique jewel. It's the greatest free will planet that has ever existed. And so this is why we have such an audience here on this planet, inside this planet, beyond this planet, that is constantly in states of observation. The Earth's wealth really comes from the biology, from the amount of life that exists upon the planet. It's not through precious ores, it's not through financial systems, it's not through any of that. The precious, I sound like Gollum here, the precious. The precious aspects of life here on the planet consist of the biology, the variety, the diversity of life on this planet, simply because there are many different species that come on this planet, again, that have come on this planet in the ancient past. Some of them may still have workarounds to come upon this planet and just study the biology. They won't even really bother too much with the human race. They'll basically just come here, they'll start studying animals, they'll start studying certain forms of flora and fauna, because a lot of the life that exists here on this planet can be harvested and turned into medicine. It can be turned again into other different biological components that another ecosystem of a planet could require, and being able to bring it into a healthier state of being, so to speak. So Earth is kind of like this gigantic natural laboratory that consists of all of this beautiful, diverse flora and fauna. And many races are just very, very interested. This is why some races would just kind of wish, oh, I just wish the damn humans would get the hell out of the way so we could, you know, work with the biology of the planet. But because they're just almost everywhere, shit. That's their mentality, right? So for a lot of those that are basically studying this sphere and all of its multicultural life, so they basically have to act within the rules. And so they basically get permission at certain times, certain occasions, to where they can come down. Some of them, again, will actually appear in like different dimensions. Some of them will be in spacecraft. Again, that could be cloaked from another dimension, piercing another dimension and coming in briefly. gathering certain forms of data as it relates to biology here on this planet, and then being able to study it, and then being able to synthesize it in a way that it can now be introduced into their own ecosystem. Sometimes it can just go upon their own ships, as their ships can also be biospheres as well, or they can take it back to their home world and they can find out how to create certain cloning experiments with this biology. But basically, again, the nature of Earth is so genuine. It is that precious gem, and it's like looking into, again, God's creation, God's planet here, the God world, right? Now, Venus, again, has that kind of similarity to it, because Venus, again, is very, very ancient. It's held by ancient Nordics, ancient human beings as well, and there's all kinds of incredible relics that exist from that planet as well. Basically, a lot of the life that came from Venus, came from Mars, came from Maldek, is also on Earth. In fact, if we were to actually go on Venus as well as Mars, we would see bones of dinosaurs, we would see bones of prehistoric animals that once existed on planet Earth, or around that time. And that their form would be almost identical to what we have or had on Earth as it relates to the prehistorics, to the dinosaurs, etc. So again, that is the wealth of the Earth. That is the beauty that it holds, is that we have no idea of the type of planet that we are existing on, how amazing it is, how beautiful it is, all of the rich content that the Earth has. And when we're able to really train our consciousness to start working with this life, it will tell you about the entire universe. It will not just tell you about this galaxy. It will not just tell you about this planet. It'll tell you about the entire universe. And one of the biggest conversationalists relating to that would be fungus, would actually be the mushroom kingdom in that way, spores, simply because they have touched the universe on all levels. It's kind of like looking at that new show, Star Trek Discovery, with the spore drive that they have, right? And looking into the muscles and the tendons of the universe. So that's exactly true. Mushrooms would probably be the most intelligent creatures you could converse with that would be able to tell you about everything within the universe. They're living libraries of information as well too. But of course, you can talk to the trees, you can talk to the grass, you can talk to the animals, you can talk to the flora and the fauna, you can talk to the water, you can talk to the marine life, you can talk to everything, and it'll give you this rich, diverse aspect of information that will just help you to understand everything. When you really just start to acquaint yourself with the life on this planet, you're basically a universal encyclopedia of information now, because all of these aspects of life are going to tell you everything about where they came from, how they originated, what their original planets of origin were like, different species that exist on those worlds, everything. It's mind-boggling to think about. And of course, I wish I had more time to actually talk more to nature, but of course I always get so hung up with a lot of my work, and yeah, I need to make more time to connect with nature itself. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and bring Adronis in, and he'll just give his brief perspective as it relates to the library worlds and Earth's wealth, and then we're going to move on into Q&A. All right, so thank you guys. I'll just be one moment as I connect to Adronis' frequency. Here we go. Terra. Soul Star. Sirius. Adronis. clear here. At this time, we bid you greetings and thank you very much for the opportunity of this interaction today. I am Adronis of Sirius, sending love, appreciation, and gratitude to all who are tuning in to this broadcast through your internet collective consciousness. We would ask all of you at this time to simply allow yourselves now to get relaxed, to get comfortable, and tune in to the vibrations of Sirius, so that you may synchronize, harmonize, and align to all of the information that we shall share with you today. Understand also that all that we shall provide is simply that of our perspective, our point of view. For all knowledge, all information, all creation itself resides within your very hearts, beings, and souls. The library world, the wealth of the earth, is not something that was, as you would say, born overnight, simply because much of the life forms that exist upon your planet are not, shall we say, concurrent with what you would understand as a time stream that you're familiar with. You could actually state that there are actually other forms of life that have been brought from your future here into your own present day. That much of these life forms have actually been harvested from other instances of Earths that would exist in different degrees of timelines, and that they have actually been fused into the flora-fauna program as it relates to the Earth herself. Simply because as certain forms of species have gone extinct, there has been a priority, necessity, to therefore go into other particular forms of Earths, again, residing within different lines dimensionally, and being able to harvest other forms of life from there through, again, appropriate states of permission, and then being able to incubate those seeds of life into the earth. So therefore, through your northern and southern poles, certain forms of life would come together. Through arc craft, again, existing in different dimensions, would be able to drop off much of the, shall we say, appropriate flora and fauna that is necessary in arranging itself appropriately in your ecosystem to take place. So basically, what also makes Earth so diverse is the amount of life that comes together through different dimensions. And it is all the different dimensions of life that are now all sharing the same space as it relates to your own planet. So again, that is also a unique function relating to your own Earth. For many other planets do not do such a thing. So again, the Earth is basically able to maintain itself appropriately with the new life that comes upon the planet. That again is, shall we say, not only picking up much of the slack to where the previous animals, or again, flora and fauna that are now extinct existed, but they're also starting to adapt themselves in different ways to actually prevent certain levels of extinction in those, shall we say, capacity of cataloging to take place again. And so basically, humanity is being scrutinized by the heart of the earth herself. She will understand exactly how humanity is behaving, and she will create certain life forms of immunity that are actually immune to any particular forms of disasters that may be man-made. So again, this is why when you're actually looking in certain erupting volcanoes, that bacteria can exist. In fact, there can even be certain levels of fungus that exist, simply because they are resistant to those extensive amounts of heat. There are again other particular life forms that hold much more of a deeper dwelling within your planet that can actually consume plastics. Again, this is all part and parcel of your Earth adapting together with you. And that it is introducing these particular life forms as a means, as a hint to humanity to say, are you aware that some of this biology exists that can actually tackle much of your own problems on your planet? In fact, if you were able to take certain forms of fungicides in that way and place it into certain areas of landfill to where the aspect of the fungicide can grow, in fact, it would basically be able to, quote unquote, munch down much of the landfill, much of the waste that is actually existing. The Earth is, again, much more ahead of the game than you may realize. It realizes that it has been going through quite the challenge, working together with humanity as it relates to much of your own modern era. And it is also adapting. Not only that, but of course, much of the new generations that are coming upon your planet are now developing new aspects of innovations and technologies to help balance the environment as it relates to oceanic cleanup, air cleanup, and of course eventually moving into greater means of free energy, harmless energy, that your Earth will again work together in harmony with as it continues to develop its own biological data. But basically understanding that all of the particular species that have gone extinct upon your surface also exist within the inner Earth, which means there really is no such thing as a completely extinct species. They are all preserved. They are backed up, which means that you will find them within the inner Earth, and you will also find that much of their own DNA blueprints are contained within the archive of the heart of the Earth. If Earth herself really wanted to, she could spawn the life form again. So basically, there is no such thing as a fully extinct species. All of them are on record. All of them are within the personal akasha as it relates to the Earth herself. But truly the aspect of the Earth's wealth is that she is your mother, and that you are all children that carry her knowledge, that carry her wisdom, and you will be carrying this knowledge and wisdom with you as you eventually become starbound. You will teach other societies, other civilizations about what exists upon Earth, and being able to allow that contribution to all the love and multiculturalism of the Earth to be able to touch the heart of other worlds as well. And so the aspect of ambassadorial affairs is going to be taking place down the road as you reach levels of maturity that will bring you into a higher interstellar level of being. So this is what we can share from our perspective as it relates to the library world, to that of the wealthiness of planet Earth herself. We thank you very much for the opportunity of this interaction. We will now take a moment to return to the conduit and begin your question and answer period. One moment, please. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started with the questions session. So if you guys do have any particular questions, feel free to just post it in the chat room here. I'm just going to be taking a moment here just to scroll through the list, because I'm pretty sure we got quite a lot of people. We got quite a few viewers on here tonight. So let me just go down the list here. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, hi, hi. So okay, so just give me a minute here, guys. I'm just reading some certain comments here to see what is coming through. Just a lot of people just sharing perspective. That's great. Inner Earth, I want to go to Telos. Well, I actually was able to get a glimpse of Inner Earth when I was talking to Nefertitis a few weeks ago. He was able to bring me into the Delphi, and again, I was kind of talking to him in this kind of like a dome-like temple, and I was able to also just get a glimpse of the Delphi in that way. And it's just land that stretches on for miles and miles. It's like looking at Sweden. It was absolutely beautiful. Okay. So we got one question here from Joe Turner. Joe asks, question, Brad, are the otherwise barren landscapes of planets like Venus, Mars, etc. just that way in our dimension, third to fourth? If so, as we rise up the dimensional ladder, will these unseen scapes be revealed? Absolutely. You're right on the dot with that. Venus basically appears very barren, right? Because basically Venus has been kind of like the Tibet of our own galaxy. I would say our own star system galaxy in that way. The aspect of Venus has been basically gone under a certain level of camouflage. This is why, again, it has been made to appear that Venus is this extremely hostile world, that it's just so hot when you go up on its surface that it'll melt lead. And that's complete BS, right? It was very much a world once like Earth, but again, creating that particular impression of being like a barren rock. There are a lot of internal bases. There are a lot of internal temples. There's even pyramids on Venus as well, too, that they're covering up. I'm not too sure if they have revealed it successfully or not. But yeah, absolutely, you're very much correct. There are veils that exist upon these planets. In fact, just not too long ago, just in last week's broadcast, there was someone who was showing me about the moon glitch, where we basically see that ripple effect going up the moon, and that basically about 20 or 30 different people who have these remarkable aspects of technology, telescopic lenses, were all able to capture these particular glitches, especially ones that were happening around the year 2012. And that you can basically just see this glitchy kind of wave moving up the moon's surface in that way with great clarity. And that this can indeed be a holographic projection as well too. Again, that's very common among many of these worlds, and not only in our star system, but also within other star systems as well too. Because humanity has grasped in the past a lot of potential to have faster than light travel, teleportation, portal gateways, etc., they can go to other worlds. And basically, those particular worlds that don't want to have anything to do with humanity will primarily cloak themselves. And they'll basically put this veil of feeling that they are just a barren rock planet, that there's no life, that they're as dead as the moon, or they're as lifeless as Venus, or lifeless as Mercury, etc., and that there's nothing on those worlds. So basically, it's a veil that we're going through. Now, it is absolutely possible that certain people who are very much highly attuned can actually look at that world and actually see something very different, seeing like an Earth-like planet, seeing teeming with life. And so basically, we could say that primarily relating to the third and fourth density human beings that exist upon this planet, even with astronomers, astrologers, I wouldn't say astrologers, but astronomers, people very much interested in interstellar phenomena and studying it, that we're just looking at veils, that we're looking at holographic inserts that are contained upon those worlds, and being able to notice that, oh, well, maybe it's barren, maybe it's lifeless, but if they were able to turn those veils off, we'd all be in shock, right? We would say Jupiter having a load of life, which it does have. We would see Saturn having a load of life. Did you ever notice how Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus have those same kind of qualities, that same kind of shield as it relates to a gas giant type atmosphere? Well, again, that is purposeful, simply because they represent worlds of a different type. And there are very ancient civilizations that once existed on Jupiter, on Saturn, on Neptune, on Uranus. All of those beings, it's hard to say if they're still here, if they've migrated, or if they're just hiding underground. But being able to imagine that if all of a sudden a veil drops on Jupiter and you actually saw Jupiter like an Earth-like planet, can you imagine how exciting that would be? To go on there, and it would be indescribable, right? But that's primarily what's happening, is that this whole star system is intricately designed to give the impression that everywhere except Earth has absolutely no life on it, right? And so, of course, we're starting to look for water on moons, and of course water on Mars, and et cetera, et cetera. That's nothing, right? These are, again, just all part of holographic landscapes, part of holographic environments. And it's very, very easy through the type of technology that a lot of these beings have to just put this little cloak shield on board a planet and just create this impression of an image. Again, the moon is notorious for that, being able to give the impression that it's a lifeless body, when in fact it was one of the satellites of Meldek at a particular time, and it certainly had a great deal of life on that area. But of course, because of the experiment that's happening with Earth and the developing culture, it needs to give the impression that everything else within this entire star system needs to be completely devoid of life, and that the only form of life here is on Earth. Well, my friends, that is complete and total BS. Right? It's all part of us interacting together with a game, of us just being able to look at these planets and actually realize there is some type of holographic insert, there is some type of holographic environment that's taking place that's creating the image of it being barren. And again, if you go on to these planets, even when they are holographically created, it's more so than just the idea of a simple holographic projection. It's actually looking into another dimension. It's like a holographic dimension. You can pick up sand, you can pick up rocks, everything looks absolutely real. But all it really takes is a flickering of that dimensional veil, and poof, you can literally be on an entire new planet. And that may also say some certain things about Earth and say, well, maybe there are certain things on Earth that are hidden. Now you're getting the point. Now you're understanding. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of things on Earth that are hidden and can be hidden holographically. In fact, there can be cities in the sky that are just hidden in plain sight, right? They basically just have these veils over them, disguising themselves as the sky, as the atmosphere, etc. There's a lot, guys. There's a lot that has been pulled over our eyes for a very, very long time. So absolutely, Joe, you're right on track with that. Okay. So this is a question from a person I was just speaking to previously before coming on the air tonight. From Alexander, he asks, hey Brad, could you ask Adronis to give an overview of the civilization ethnic group of Russia and its galactic roots? What are the origins of the Russian language and its closest galactic kins, if there are such? Did ETs help Russia during the war with the Nazi Germany? Also, what do you see with the historical rule of Russia and its contribution to human race upliftment in the years to come? Well, that's a lot of questions, Alexander. I don't think we can go through all of them tonight, but I will get Adronis to come through and share a brief perspective as it relates to Russia. Because you're right, there's not a lot of information on the background of Russia. Why? Well, maybe that's something we'll find out. Okay, here we go. We are here. Thank you very much, Alexander, for your question as it pertains to your country of Russia. Russia is basically a very special area upon your planet that has its own history hidden for much of your entire world. Why? Because it is the land of the ancient masters. Simply because, much in regards to what you would know as ancient Vedics, ancient masters that came to this particular land would basically be what you would refer to as the second Mu, or the second Lemuria. Basically, Russia existed in a great level of utopia for a grand amount of time. Its vastness has basically spanned your ages as it relates to agriculture, as it relates to abundance, as it relates to cooperation, as it relates to a land that actually contains much of the ancient relics previously spoken of in this discussion this evening of your time. Now, the Russian, shall we say, descendants would be primarily from what you would know as the Nordic races. So there is a vast amount of, shall we say, Nordic background to which Russia itself comes together. There are connections to that of what you would know as the Pleiades. There are connections to that of what you would know as Sirius. There are other connections to, shall we say, even within your own inner Earth, to where much of the aspects of the Nordic races had educated much of the Russian population in the ancient times about the aspect of pure living. We could say that much of the Russian populace in that sense in those ancient times were again philosophers of the law of one, and that they also led a very, very prosperous life. They were again highly agricultural, very much in a higher state of unity. Basically, you could state that Russia on your planet altogether has been the most peaceful country that has ever existed. More peaceful than Lemuria, more peaceful than Atlantis, more peaceful than any other particular country on your world, simply because it was all about fellowship. Russians, in regards to the ancient times, had such a feeling of community. There was everything shared. It was truly a unified society. But again, through many aspects of years of separation through empires, primarily within your areas of Western Europe, that basically created certain divisions. Again, there are polarities that were coming in that were basically dividing much of the Russian people. And because they were very much, again, a peaceful society, they were also seen as a very large target. Have you ever wondered exactly why much of your Western world, specifically the United States, has always put its crosshairs on Russia in one way or the other? Simply because Russia holds the aspect to salvation for your entire planet. It is the most peaceful country on your world, and that much of its own history is rich with, again, love, compassion, unity, community, agriculture. Everything was together. So basically, as you were asking about the aspect of the Russian language in that way, again, there are several different dialects, and that they, again, all associate together with ancient Nordic races. That is primarily their brief history as it relates to themselves. So much of Russia has been a country of peace, a country to where the ancient masters have come forward. In fact, it was your own Edgar Cayce paraphrasing in the idea that Russia is primarily going to be the savior of the entire world, simply because that's its energy. It is one of the purest areas upon your planet, although it may not seem that way with much of the governments, but primarily in regards to much of the land, to much of the culture that existed in those ancient times of Russia. It is basically your most spiritually pure place on your entire planet. We thank you very much for your question. All right, well, that's pretty cool. So thank you again, Alexander, for that question. I know that there's a lot more, but again, we don't have too much time tonight to go through it in great depth. So again, just something to dwell on. And I would just say, guys, do your research. Look into a lot of the ancient Russian philosophies. One of these particular examples would be the Anastasia books, right? The Ringing Cedar series. Anastasia talks a lot about Russian history in that way. And I would suggest starting to look those up because they can provide a lot more answers. But that's primarily what I've received as well, too, from intuition, is that Russia has been the entire spirit capital of the world. That's where the dawning of all spirituality came through. In fact, if we were to looking at Tibet and certain areas like that, a lot of their ancient teachings have even merged together with Russian philosophies, the Vedics in the ancient times as well. So very beautiful. Thank you again, Alexander, for your question. That was excellent. Okay, so we're going to probably take about 3 or 4 more questions. So we're only got about 15 minutes left or so. Okay, here's an interesting one from Wendy. Are we in some sort of computer simulation? Seeing numbers nonstop like 144 everywhere and the Mandela effect leaves me no other possible way to think of this life. It's so calculated based on numbers. Well, of course, absolutely. This is all just one big experiment. This is all just one big gigantic program. This is one big simulation that we're going through here. This is again why many ancient masters have spent so many years going into isolation, going into solitude, and moving past the veil of this illusion, because basically this illusion survives by us continuing to milk and be nourished by everything that represents its infrastructure in that way. And basically by going into a state of beautiful humility, by working with your own karmic aspects and going into retreats, into nature, and just feeling your pure essence, going beyond the body, going beyond the reality body, going around beyond the environment, and connecting deeper into the aspect of your own heart and your own soul, and just feeling this pure love for everything. You bypass the illusion, you transcend it. It no longer becomes something that is grasping your arm anymore and feeling that you need to be a part of it. That has very much been a lot of my recent impulses as well too, is kind of just stepping away from things for a little bit and just being able to go to isolation and just starting meditating in solitude and just connecting to the God self, connecting to my own inner God self. And I know many of us may have those calls as well too. But when I say I step away, it would probably just be for like the holidays, and then I'd come right back because I absolutely love what I do. But absolutely, I mean, this is all part of a gigantic simulation. Their numerological synchronicities, again, are all just part of different hacking codes, so to speak. Closing a certain gate behind you, opening up a new gate in front of you based upon certain forms of characteristics, emotional traits, mentalities, physical attributes, aspects, etc. All of this is just constant shift, and these numerical codes are just adjusting you vibrationally to go into different realities, to go into these octaves of different dimensions existing within the earth herself. It's it's remarkable, guys. It really is. It just blows me away about every single question that I get every week, and it's something that's brand new. And it just blows us away, really, about everything that's happening on this planet that we are not even realizing that's happening, right? It's like a maze. It's just looking at this maze where you turn every corner and now something new is revealed, right? And now basically when you go into that state of retreat, when you create that aspect of humility, you're now raising above the maze, right? You rise up, you look at a bird's eye view, and now you're no longer stuck inside the maze. Now you can see all the treasures, that exist inside the maze, because now you become the maze. You become everyone. You become everything. So yeah, it has basically been a simulation that has been existing for hundreds of thousands of years at least, right? And we're now just only starting to pierce the veil and transcend it. And again, that all just comes from connecting back to your God source, connecting back to your source consciousness, going beyond the body, no longer existing through free will, but now coming into instinctual will. And there's been a lot of requests about that as well too. People say, "Oh, Brad, in abundance dimension, the abundance dimension presentation, you talked about instinctual will, that you actually are able to bypass choice. You're able to advance choice in this reality. And can you talk more about that?" So I will definitely make a video about that. I know I don't have time tonight to talk about it. I want to try and get to more questions. But yeah, that will be a video that will be coming up as it relates to instinctual will and completely moving past the free will illusion altogether. Okay. Okay, here's one from Craig Pace. Craig asks, how do we visit and interact consciously with other dimensions? You have to basically be the vibrational alignment of that dimension. So whatever that dimension relates to is the most important thing. It's about creating relationship, right? So if you want to create a connection where you are, again, abundantly financially wealthy, for example, then you basically have to give that impression of a feeling, right? So look into the Abundance Dimension webinar on my channel. If you have not seen it yet, it's going to give you the entire discourse about how that's done, right? You go into the abundance dimension. You go into the causal realm, right? So we have the physical realm here, which is, again, everything about logic, science, physical reality, blah, 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 the scientific cult, etc., right? Then you move into the astral domain, which represents that of the thought dimension. Then you move up into the causal domain, which represents that of the abundance dimension, where it's pure feeling. And now you're basically just sensing that feeling of what it is to, shall we say, be financially wealthy, right? And you're becoming that particular feeling. You're already seeing the outcome. You're no longer seeing that I need to go from A to B to C to D and then I get it. No, you're immediately seeing something that has already happened. And now you're living in that particular type of vibration. And the dimensional connection, connecting you to the dimensional current, is so flawless, you just won't even know you're there until this window of opportunity comes your way and saying, oh my goodness, I was just thinking about this the other day. And now it's come here, right? So now you're just getting that particular impression that this window of opportunity has come, and now there's all these opportunities of great financial abundance coming your way, right? So it's playing out linearly what you have already felt beyond space and time, right? So this is something that happens with a lot of people, and I guess, guys, wish I had more time tonight. But basically, we submit ourselves so deeply to the physical dimension, and we feel that the physical dimension has such a huge grasp over us that we're unable to bypass it. And this is the biggest load of BS there is, right? You do not have to play with the logical foreplay of this physical dimension at all. Right? You're basically knowing that you're tying up loose ends from other instances of vibrations that you have carried, and that you're being able to tie them up, right? Mending out those old wounds in that way. But once you mend the old wounds, you now have an abundant aspect of possibility to play with, and it does not need to function in regards to the continuity of going from A to B to C to D linearly through this lust dimension that we call physical reality. Because that is exactly what this dimension is. It's lust. Everything here is about lust. Lust for knowledge, lust for power, lust for wealth, lust for sexuality, lust for family, lust for friendship, lust for relationship, lust, 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 right? It is a lust dimension, right? When you start moving past that lust dimension, and you come more into love dimension, which is about the aspect of abundance, now your reality completely goes into a new level of foreplay, right? Now the Rubik's Cube starts shifting, and you're now creating the aspect of what we would term as a physical world, now existing throughout all of your feelings that have been apprised through the state of being abundant, right? So that can be financial wealth, that can be going into higher levels of realization, higher self-awareness. The possibilities are endless. but you do not have to be confined to this physical world. And the only reason why you're confined to this physical world is because of an addiction called intellectualism. It is because of an addiction to lust, right? To lusting for knowledge, to lusting for something that has to be absolutely practical, that needs to have an A, B, C, and D. And we become completely confined within this BS lust dimension, right? And there is so much more beyond that. So basically, it's the reliance of the external. It's saying that something needs to be practical, something needs to be reasonable, something needs to be logical, and those are completely useless, right? It's the only idea that practicality serves you as it relates to the events of realization, right? But when you're going into the abundance dimension and you're becoming the vibration of these feelings, you're empowering them so much with your own energy. This is what's going to, break you through and break all the veils and going into a completely different dimension of reality. Again, after you're mending your own karmic wounds, and now you're coming into this reality that is just beautifully abundant, and you're going more towards the creator within yourself. And this is helping you to completely dissolve the barriers, the veils of this reality that, again, is just so base and one of the lowest aspects of dimensions that we can ever be in, right? There is nothing appealing about this dimension at all. It's when you start going into the thought dimension, when you start going into the causal dimensions, when you start going into the etheric dimensions, when you start playing with feeling, when you make feeling and simplicity the way of life, now you have something more beautiful. You're playing with paradox, you're playing with feeling, and now the universe is only being a receptacle interface to how you're playing with reality through the state of feeling, right? So again, I could go on and on about that, but that's just something to start your way. So again, look into the Abundance Dimension webinar that's on my YouTube channel. Check it out, and that can provide some more insight on this whole topic. Okay. Okay, let me go down to one more question, guys, and then we're going to wrap up. Just going to scroll down the list a little bit more. It's hard, guys. There's some pretty good questions here, but I'm just trying to go down the list to make sure I don't miss anybody. Okay, so mostly just some comments here. Let me see. Okay, so I guess we'll end with this question. Jerome asks, hey Brad, do you know anything about the Caribbean and its connection with Atlantis, especially Barbados? The entire island is on a crystal, it seems, and used by the indigenous in the area as a ritual site. Well, yeah, basically all of those islands were basically part of Atlantean territory at that time. But again, the feeling is that there are certain remnants of pieces of Atlantis that are existing. Some people refer to it around Bimini Island in that way. But there are, if you're looking around that particular area of the Atlantic, you can actually see a lot of ancient ruins that are deep underwater. And again, ancient pyramids, ancient sites. So those were kind of like crystallized sites, absolutely, of Atlantis. So yeah, there's definitely remains in there. But basically, the entire reference is that Antarctica is basically the remains of Atlantis in that way. And that basically, if we're looking at maps hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Antarctica was way more higher up in the Atlantic, and it certainly wasn't covered in ice. So there was definitely something that was happening around that time that created this incredible ice sheet around Antarctica, or Atlantis in that time, and then being able to have it drift down into the southern hemisphere. So something was going on around those times. But definitely a lot of areas of Cuba, areas of the Bahamas, Bimini Island, etc., those are all former remnants of areas of Atlantis, absolutely. So yeah, that's basically what I can share with it in a bit of a nutshell. Okay, so I think that'll be it tonight. Here's one from, sorry, I can't really pronounce the name. Vedic are originally in Slovenian language. We don't have Vedic books like India. We have it in our language. We are the oldest culture, and our DNA is unique. I had crazy potent waves through my body when you talked about Russian topic. Thank you. Yeah, great. And it's true. I mean, basically a lot of the Vedic roots, there's even a lot of our own multiculturalism that was once part of Russia. In fact, you find out that there can be people from the Mediterranean that were once part of Russia. There are even a lot of the Indian culture that was once part of Russia. Russia was not all Caucasian people, right? It was a mixture of different races that came together and then migrated. In fact, the Jewish were once part of areas within Russia as well too. And then of course great migrations took place. But from Indian, Asian culture, even certain African cultures as well too, Russia was again Tower of Babel, right? Representing a great utopia. And it was even more ancient than a lot of the Lemurian aspects, right? So again, it was just a pure, abundant country that was just full of agriculture and people ready to assist, and great spiritual life, great spiritual masters. You know, all the spiritual masters that we could imagine them well within the thousands or even hundreds of thousands that would exist upon Russia in the ancient times. So yeah, I mean, there's so much, again, about our history that's not being told. So Russia is definitely one of the biggest gems on the planet. So again, I just say look into a lot of its history as best you can. All right. Thank you guys for, again, a really exciting New Earth Teachings webcast tonight. I really had a lot of fun. I hope all of you guys had fun as well too. So join us next week as, again, I will be doing some empathic interfacing with the blue avians, so with Sun Ra and Sea Ra, and just kind of like how I connected with Nefertitis, I'll be connecting with them next week. So that, again, will be next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Feel free to go to my website, newearthteachings.com, private sessions, digital courses, blog, free media, and a lot more. So again, take care, and I'll speak to you again in another perspective of the now. Take care. Namaste.